in Western society today, and documents like the United Nations human rights document. Is that going to be the better basis, or is kind of Islamic scripture going to be the better basis? I think it's very easy to show that the Islamic culture is inferior to producing equitable, fair, free, tolerant society that doesn't allow slavery and doesn't allow people to be murdered just for changing their
James,
religion.
Can I come back at a few points, because I think what you've done there, you've done a really good job in trying your best. Okay, and honestly, I have to give you credit, because
you also mentioned kind of like the narrative of whether it was kind of the Western countries who coerced and pressured and advised Muslim countries to actually abolish slavery, and you said, oh no, that's rubbish. And I think kind of like, history will...
I didn't say that was rubbish.
Wrong.
No, I said that the time you're talking about was ironically a time where Western countries had been colonizing the Muslim countries. That's what I said.
But here's the thing though.
And you agree with that.
But here's the thing though. Like, kind of, you can say that the Western countries in like 1850, they did all these bad things. So who are they to say to Muslim countries?
No, that's not my argument. That's not my
bad things. But
that's not my argument.
We can still take the good things that they did.
No.
Which Muslim countries were slow to
James,
do.
Fair enough.
And so you still need to.
Fair enough.
If you're going to make the case that it is, an Islamic, doctrine to end slavery because of this verse in kind of the Quran that says that kind of some of the zakat money should go towards freeing slaves, then you need to try and account for why it is that Muslim countries ended up being so much slower than Western countries to do so.
I haven't allowed you to speak, so I think I have to say, you've tried your best, and based on you've tried your best, and you have made some points, although you've made some equivocations, and I have to point them out. First equivocation that you made, you used the word good and bad. Now, good and bad on a liberal basis depends on what's legitimate and illegitimate, what's acceptable, what's non-acceptable, what's mandated and what's not mandated. So if I say it's acceptable, it's mandated and legitimate on political liberalism that you can have slaves, for instance, and I can make that argument using the social contract. If I say it's legitimate, it's acceptable and so on liberalism, on political liberalism, to have colonies, right? Just like John Stuart Mill would agree with me, just like John Locke would agree with me, just like Immanuel Kant would agree with me, just like Montesquieu would agree with me, just like the American founding fathers would agree with me, the writers of the Federalist Papers would agree with me, and so on and so forth. Then it's a different case to make, because when you say good and bad, now good and bad is defined by liberalism if you're a liberal. Now you have different kinds of liberalism. So you have political liberalism. Now what's desirable on political liberalism might be differentiated, by the way, by what is desirable on social liberalism, okay? And I'll give you an example of that. Now, utilitarian-based liberalism, the type of which that John Stuart Mill defended and wrote a book called On Utilitarianism. In chapter 4, he talked about how to prove it's called proving utilitarianism. And then he talked about that which is desirable, which makes you happy, is that which is good. That's what he said. So if you talk about social liberalism, having a slave on social liberalism could only be objected to on the basis of the harm principle. Now, if there's a structure, a politically legitimized structure on liberalism, of colonialism, for instance, which entails a kind of exploitation or slavery, in essence, that could be acceptable both on political liberalism and on social liberalism. So I think the idea here, because there's two things we're doing. We have to look at the principles, and then we have to look at the history, okay? Now, the history might not always be in line with the principles and vice versa. It could be the case that in abstraction, in philosophical abstraction, that the principles allow these things to happen, but that in historical reality, those things did not happen, and vice versa. Now, what I'm saying to you, I'm putting to you is that there is nothing, for example, in liberalism which abolishes or does anything to do with racism. There were many liberals racists, and there's nothing within liberalism, social liberalism, political liberalism, or any kind of economic liberalism. Can you stop messing around, please? Sorry. Or political liberalism, which says, for example, racism is wrong. So if someone wants to predicate an exploitation or economic relationship on a racial system, on liberalism, then that could be justified philosophically in abstraction. There's nothing, and that's why you find up until Winston Churchill, you have racist people in this country and other countries in the West. Why? Because there's nothing within their worldview which stops racism. They were forced to be multicultural when they begged, the second world countries that they once colonized, subjects from those countries, to come back into the country so that they can build their infrastructure. And they knew that they had to get along with them in order to make societies work. That's why racism was seen as bad. It's nothing to do with liberalism. It's nothing to do with human rights. Because human rights is an extension of liberalism. And in fact, I can't even recall in the human rights document that which explicitly condemns, this kind of attitude, inherent attitude within a human being. So the point I'm making to you is this, is if I said slavery is a good thing, as a liberal, you couldn't even refute that statement. And if I believe that to be the case, you can't say that's good and that's bad, because good and bad is something which is determined by the mechanisms that different liberal philosophers put down. And you can't prove philosophically that is bad according to colonization is bad, slavery, exploitation, relation. In fact, you could argue that the kind of supply side economics that you once referred to, that was espoused by people like Adam Smith, and that was objected to by people like John Maynard Keynes, who of course had this different model, and so on. That kind of liberalism actually facilitates the exploitational relationships, which you could argue compound what, I'm not going to use these terms, but this relationship with surplus value. Marx called it surplus value, right? So the idea of the worker and all that kind of stuff. Exploitation happens in capitalism. So you could even make an economic case against liberalism and say, look, this is what's happening now with the IMF Bank, which is legitimate from economic liberal perspective, where they're giving the African subcontinental countries these big loans that they can't pay back, and that's effectively putting half the population into slavery. And now they have to do this and that and the other in order to pay them back. It might not be direct slavery, but it's an economically sanctioned slavery of exploitation, capitalistic exploitation, which is legitimate on economic liberalism, sanctioned by political liberalism, and not contradicted by social liberalism. Therefore, we have to be honest. What we're saying is that I think you have this trajectory of, the white saviorism complex, that the white man came with his Western ideas to help us brown people understand what true morality was and what isn't, is actually a false notion on liberalism, because there's nothing inherent, nothing which inheres within that philosophy which objects to racism, which objects to exploitation, which objects to colonialism, and so on. So I think that the argument is a flawed one. It's a good attempt to refute me, but it wasn't a philosophically satiating one.
Excellent attempt.
It was a good try. It was a nice try. But what I will say to you is that in Islam, I'll repeat this, we're not apologists to the liberal world, because I said to you, I'm quoting scholars from the medieval world before, like Al-Ghazali, who I quoted, died 1111. Yes, he died 1111. He wrote a book called Al-Mustasfa, talking about the usul and this and that and the objects of Sharia. He himself said in parts of his works that slavery, the objective of it is to do away with it. Yes, he said this. This is not a response to the liberal that's forcing us to say this. No, we said this before John Locke even lived. This was 500 or 600 years before John Locke. So the point is, the systems were in place. We have a justifiable moral reason to say that freeing slaves is a good thing, and that's what the Quran says. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةُ فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ. What is the good way? Freeing slaves. That's the Quran. You don't have any alternative liberal reason to say that slavery is wrong. If there is one, or exploitation is wrong, or colonialism is wrong, or that freeing the slave is a good thing, I would like to hear it.
Okay, yeah, of course.
Okay. I would like to hear it.
And so, the two main points you made, just to summarize the points that I've noted down. You talked about racism in Islam versus liberalism. You talked about slavery in Islam versus liberalism.
Yeah.
And you said that
No, I also talked
you also
about,
mentioned Al-Ghazali at the very end.
No, I talked about something which you missed out, which is very important, which was actually the crux of my argument.
Okay.
I said that you were saying you were using the words good and bad. Yes.
Okay.
This is a good law, apostasy is a good law, this is a bad law, or whatever. I'm saying good and bad is that which is conceivable and acceptable and legitimate within liberalism.
Okay.
You have to address this point. How can you say that as a liberal, you believe that killing the apostate is wrong when actually political, social and economic liberalism does not object to it from a principle perspective? I'm not talking about John Locke just because he said it was wrong. I'm using him as a supplementary evidence. My question is, from a structurally philosophical perspective, how can you prove that killing the apostate in a state which claims to be, say for example, Christian or Jewish is wrong on liberalism?
Okay, great. So the thing is, your conception of liberalism is anachronistic because you're only looking at the kind of 200-year-old liberal thinkers, and then you've constructed this idea of liberalism that hasn't advanced whatsoever. Okay, and so yes, it's true that back in those times there were people who at the same time were like espousing ideas of like kind of the sanctity of the individual and like being individualist, but then also were being contradictory in terms of slavery and racism and so on and so forth. Okay, but we're not beholden to those people. Okay, and so
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so your concept of like, you're a liberal, so why don't you think like these people 200 years ago?
No, I didn't say people. I said, sorry, that's a straw man argument. I said the structures, the principles,
you've taken
the structures of social contract.
Because you've taken this conception
but James,
of liberalism.
But that's not my argument. That's not my argument.
Then you talk about liberals today.
What is liberalism?
It depends.
Okay, is liberalism social contract? Can you have liberalism without social contract? Yes or no?
I don't know.
If you take away a social contract from liberalism, you have anarchy, okay? It becomes a different ideology. I'm saying the existence of social contract allows for the universality of law to triumph over and above the individual's right to, let's say for instance, freedom of expression.
No, but you can take this liberal idea.
That's my argument.
No, but you can take this individual idea of liberalism, of the the sacred individual, and that you shouldn't infringe on other people's freedom, and then extrapolate from that towards a kind of minarchist or anarchist society where
that's not liberalism. Then we've left liberalism.
You've left what you.
So you have to reject your ideology.
Yeah, no, but the thing.
So you agree with me then?
No, I don't agree with you because like because if what you're trying to do is debunk kind of 200-year-old people,
I'm not doing
great.
That.
Because you aren't debunking anyone today. You aren't debunking kind of people who like value
you don't understand the argument. I'm not doing that. I'm saying that all liberal contractarian, by definition, thinkers, they have to believe in a social contract.
No, but
I'm saying that in principle,
those people hardly exist today, though.
No, any liberal that lives now, whether they're constitutional.
No, whatever really, you called them social liberals before. Could you define that?
No. I'm saying that any liberal
who from this idea of the individual being having rights, which would be considered like in some respects a liberal idea, they have like from that kind of gained these ideas of a kind of fairness and kind of what's the word, not entropy, the word empathy. Yeah, they've gained empathy, like treating people the way that you would like to be treated, and so on and so forth. And what you're saying doesn't apply to them whatsoever.
I'm saying you're not understanding the argument.
You've managed to.
Can you have a political liberalism?
You've managed to knock down like kind of
no, you don't.
People in the 1800s who had like contradictory ideas
1800s,
and still managed to like
forget about those people. I'm asking a simple question.
Then let's forget about them.
I have one question. Is it possible to have a political liberalism without a social contract?
I don't know.
Okay. No. Don't attack him too much.
Yeah.
If you have a non-contractarian understanding of liberalism, which you want to promote to us, then you can do that. But what I'm saying is that my argument is it's not actually possible to have a non-contractarian version of political liberalism and maintain a full liberal character. You cannot be a liberal without believing in a social contract. You will slip into an anarchy. That's my idea, which means you have no government. You might as well kill it, everyone kill it. It's the law of the jungle then. So I'm saying without social contract, there is no government, there is no authority, there is no sovereign, there is no universality of law. Therefore, what is pertinent to a liberal discourse is a social contract, a political liberalism. If you're saying that, you don't know, but I'm saying to you, this is my argument, that it's not possible to have a political liberalism without a social contract. If that is the case, then the laws that are sanctioned by the political authority or the sovereign, the laws that are sanctioned by that authority and become universalized by law, they are legitimate. They are the good thing. They are what is seen as good by liberalism.